It's here. It's now. It's Wine Talks with Paul K.
Hey, welcome to Wine Talks with Paul K. And we are in studio today in beautiful Southern California, about to have a conversation with Jane Lopes and John Ross of Legend Australian Imports. Introductions in just a moment. Wine Talks, of course, available on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Spotify, wherever you hang out for podcasting. Hey, have a listen to Master of Wine, Nova Catamart. Credible personality and driven woman who is not only making wine in Napa as a master of wine, but she's making wine in Ohio. Figure that one out. And in the Finger Lakes. So fascinating conversation. Please subscribe. Give me some thumbs up. If you got nothing else to say about it, then don't say anything at all. I appreciate the support and the downloads. But not why we're here today. We're here to have a conversation with Jane Lopes and John Ross, a married couple who have been bringing wines from Australia into America. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And where are you? But you're currently in North Carolina.
Correct. Yeah, but we live in Nashville. We're in North Carolina. We import Australian wine.
And that's at least 50 minutes worth of conversation right there.
Yes.
But we were in Nashville not too long ago, and it was the first time I'd been, and I just was fascinated by it. What was cool about it was, even though it was really crowded and there was some concert going on at the stadium there, the arena, but it just felt so safe. Even with these large crowds. Is that always the case?
Maybe depends on the time.
Maybe that was
yeah, I think it depends on what frightens you, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know.
There's a lot of drinking.
There's a lot of drinking, but I don't know. It just seemed
No, I was safe in Nashville.
Yeah, as long as on the same page, it seemed like it was on the same page.
Yeah.
Of course, you have to go to, I had a conversation with Jonathan Waxman, the famed chef at Barbudo, and I had to go back and listen to the podcast because he had said he took Giada to Robert's Western for the $5, fried bologna sandwich.
Yep.
Yep.
And I'm like, I got to do that. So it was like midnight. So tell me, you guys are both Master Sommeliers, which is that's an onerous diploma or certification to earn. It takes many years. How long did it take you guys?
It took from first test to last, me 11, Jane 9.
Wow. And in between working, trying to earn a living, studying.
Yeah. Working in restaurants and retail, some for me, and writing a book, moving to Australia. We passed some exams in that time period too.
That's amazing. And is it structured? Can you not, what's the word? Can you fail? I know you can fail the test, but can you fail the process?
I think the process is fairly, it's not very guided. So you really have to find your own process. It's very different from the MW exam and the WSET. It's very much self-study, community reliant. And I think there's certain ways that maybe you can lean into that and find a successful process, but very much each is their own, just like wine.
Yeah, I always tell people who are planning to sit for the exams, like, you have to make it worthwhile for yourself as a person and a professional, no matter what the outcome of the exam is. So, I think you have to kind of find your own definition of success in the process, no matter if you pass at the end of the day.
So the motivation for you to, professional motivation, in the old days in Vegas, for instance, old days, I'm talking probably the early 2000s, there were 6-digit jobs you could get as soon as you got a certification, and you could run the wine list at a hotel there and make all kinds of money, which we all know that's changed radically. But was it just a professional knowledge base attempt, or?
I think some of those, like, what it does for you, I think those are the motivations that result in, maybe not the most kind of earnest and authentic and pure, experience with it. I think that, it was probably more I feel very fortunate. I worked in the New York restaurant industry for a long time, and in a 3 Michelin star restaurant for a while, and the endless pursuit of knowledge within your own profession was just what you did. And I don't know that if I wasn't in that scenario, I would have found my own path to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think everyone has sort of their own motivations. For me, it was just sort of a personal goal and pushing myself to achieve this high standard. And I think you really grow as a professional because, it's easy to just not sort of study or systematically study or only study certain things, the wines that you really love. And I think by just saying you have to kind of open your eyes to the world of wine, you become a really complete wine professional, which is a great thing.
Is it different than the MW in that I know the MW most all wine is London based, so it's English, has got that whole moniker, but doesn't it include hospitality as well? So the Master Somm is a little more rounded in not only procuring, understanding wine, but presenting wine.
Absolutely. And I mean, last night we were working a wine dinner and presenting the book and the wines. And there was a gentleman there who was in his 3rd tier of the W set. And he's a consumer. He's an enthusiast. He's not a professional. And
really?
He said, I don't understand why. And I said, he knew exactly why he shouldn't take the CMS or courses, right? Or the exams. They test whether you can build a profitable and accessible wine list. They test whether you can serve wine in a restaurant setting in a well beyond proficient manner. The MW is about wine, full stop, not about the roles of a sommelier as a profession. And they're very different in that sense. And the MW also has a curriculum that it teaches and tests, and the CMS has a test.
And
that's it.
We'll see you at the testing site.
Exactly.
Well, kudos to both of you for doing that, because it is a passion. It is take time, and it does, cut into your regular schedule. And hopefully, I think certainly what you're doing when we get into the conversation about Australian wines would pay off on that. And like having a wine dinner last night or this week, you're going to tap into those things that you learn to best present wine. And we're going to have that part of our conversation be about that. What we need to tell the consumer, what we need the consumer to understand, how we want to help them get the passion that we have to not drink Apothic Red and, Cali, Snoop Dogg's Cali Red. It's just my favorite thing to beat up. But you had a background, John, in hospitality in restaurants, and particularly Michelin wines, Michelin star restaurants, which are very important. How about you, Jane? Your background to get to to get the Master Sommelier and into importing Australian wines.
It's Wine Talks with
I
Paul
studied
K.
Renaissance literature in college. I thought
that would certainly prepare you for this.
Yeah, exactly. Thought I was going to be an academic, but ended up working in a wine shop after I graduated and just really loved it. So I started in retail. And then I started working in restaurants after that. And John and I worked together at 11 Madison Park in New York, 3 Michelin star restaurants. So that's where our worlds collided. And then in late 2016, I got a job offer to run the wine program in a restaurant called Attica in Melbourne, Australia, which they don't have Michelin stars in Australia, but if they did, it certainly would be up there. It's a beautiful, really amazing restaurant. So we said, why not? Let's move to Australia. And so the restaurant sponsored my visa, and we were able to prove partnerships so John could come over on my visa and work wherever he wanted. And so he ended up working for a really great restaurant group called the Rockpool Group. So I'd say we worked for 2 of really the greatest Australian chefs, in Neil Perry and Ben Shuri. We just really fell in love with Australian wine and thought it was a shame that more of it wasn't in the US. Only less than 10% of Australian wineries export to the US. it's not, it's a pretty limited vision of what's going on over there. There's over 65 different wine regions in Australia, and the US sees a very small handful of those.
Let me back up just for a second, just for the listeners, that 11 Madison Park wasn't voted or considered the best restaurant in the world, right?
Yes, yes.
Well, that's-
And it won that the year,
we were there for that culmination and skipped off to Australia.
Well, it was fun, but the 50 Best Awards were in Australia that year. So we worked at 11 Madison Park through the end of that sort of voting period. And then we were in Australia and got to celebrate with them as they were named number one. So,
well, you guys are gluttons for punishment. You get into the hospitality side, restaurant side, even at the highest level, it's still very difficult work. And then you get into exporting and importing wine, which is another, we'll talk about the headwinds to that. But I have a fun anecdotal question, and that is, what would be the average ticket, the average cover for a diner at 11 Madison Park?
Overpriced.
What?
No, that's not fair.
Well, no, I mean, we've been to Louis XV in Monaco. It's like 700 euros to get out of there, right, per person.
Right. E&P was what, low threes for food before tax and tip, and we probably saw, I think the entry level wine pairing was about $1.45, and we usually saw average alcohol spend right around there, so below $5 before tax and tip.
So I'm going to stump you with this little anecdotal trivia question. That is, what would be the most expensive restaurant in America?
Whoever has the most expensive bottle you can buy on their list, I would say. Because you could turn any restaurant experience into the most expensive restaurant experience with a bottle of wine.
Well, there's one in LA, and you cannot leave. The least expensive it could be would be $1,250 a person.
Oh, okay. I think
What is that?
And it's at Disneyland.
Oh, wow.
And no one knows about it. It's booked. And it's $15,000 to book it. You can bring one person, 2 or 12. And so if you bring 12, it'd be $1,250. And it's, it's a 7-course thing. It's the regular prefixes. And of course, there's wine pairings. But if you go into Pirates of the Caribbean, and then above the Pirates of the Caribbean is Club 33, which is a membership club. I forgot the price now. It used to be $10,000 years ago. Now it's more. But above that was going to be Disney's apartment. He lived above the firehouse, but they had drawn this place to be his 2-bedroom apartment. They didn't use it up until about 10 years ago. They remodeled it to the original spec and use it as a restaurant, use it as a hospitality suite. And they would go into the park and they would grab a family and say, by the way, you're staying overnight here, and here's the deal. So they take the kids up into this apartment and they get a dinner and they'd stay overnight and they go back in the park the next day. Now you book it for the evening, it's $15,000. And I love that question because I don't know, the food's probably not that,
That's all right. I mean,
yeah, you're paying for, I guess, to be above Pirates of the Caribbean.
Right.
I have friends that are in the Disney Vacation Club. I wonder if they can use their credits for the.
Maybe, I don't know. I've had people want to do it. I'm not sure my wife's willing to pay $1,250 a person to eat there. But anyway, so let's go back a little bit. This is my 35th year buying and selling wines. What's interesting about what you're doing, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation, is the Australian wine market has sort of ebbed and flowed in the U.S., and you've been doing this long enough to probably see that. But I can remember bringing in a half a container, sharing a container with Trader Joe's, even for like a late harvest Semillon from, I think it was Penfolds at the time. There were 3 or 4 big brands in America, that Penfolds being one of them. Of course, they're still around here, but there were more. And I'm wondering if you've seen that lately, or you saw this as a need to try and want to bring imported Australian wines to America.
Yeah, we definitely, we saw it from our perspective as, sommeliers in New York, thinking that we had access to kind of
the greatest wines in the world.
Yeah, the best wines in the world, really a good experience of what's out there. And we realized that it's just Australia is so poorly represented in the US. And so we kind of saw it from just the point of view of wine professionals should be able to have access to these wines, but also an opportunity because we really believe the wines offer great value, are really delicious, just are kind of pleasing to people no matter what your kind of background is in drinking and what your palate is. And it certainly is a bit of an uphill battle because people think Australian wine is yellowtail, or at best they think it's Molly Duker. And so we're just, we're trying to change perceptions of what Australian wine is and can be. Sometimes one wine dinner, one tasting at a time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead.
I was just saying, you think of it's interesting you mentioned like the contraction, expansion of the market, and you think of the classic European regions that have staying power. Like think of Barolo. When I say the word Barolo, you not only just think of a grape and a wine style, but a place and a people and a story and a country's culture and food just from that one word. And when we think about Australian wine, we think about one specific style of wine and that's it. And it's an assumption or that's been, or a thought that's been, fed to us by Treasury, the owner of Penfolds. I'm not saying it's Treasury. I'm not speaking ill of Treasury because I think that they've done really great things for the wine industry, but there's a lot of consolidation in that world. There was a brand, Rosemount, that was quite successful in South Corp bought it. And it's really not evident in the US anymore. And, it was very clearly articulated to me recently, the wine industry to be very financially successful, a business wants to sell more cases of fewer wines. And what that does is it forces places like Australia to have comprehension in the US based on 8% of its producers, not its volume, but 8% of the businesses, the family businesses that make wine in Australia only ever told their story in the US. And that's because it's at the, opposite end of what Commerce for Wine has set its goals on.
And the average per liter price of Australian wine coming into the US is about $4 a liter. So that just gives you also an idea of the sort of predominantly which Australian wine.
In the bottle, $4 a liter or in bulk?
That is, the $4 a liter is blended across, that's customs. That's a customs value, right? So when the container comes in, whether it's a matrix or a blend of bottled and bulk measured by liter, because tax is based on a 9 liter equivalent case, or really in the US based on the gallon. So it's just it's a volumetric number.
But for the listeners that understand what that means, they're talking about $36 a case, which is very, very, very low and pretty hard to consistently, or even not even consistently, make.
Well, and once it hits
expressive wine that way,
and once it all hits all the tiers of margin, that's what you're buying on the grocery store shelf for below $10 a bottle.
Yeah. Interesting fact. I just had one of the leading counterfeit wine experts on the show a little while ago, and she said that now, even in some parts of the world, they're counterfeiting yellowtail. And so that, instead of counterfeiting Lafite and maybe Penfolds Grange or something, they're counterfeiting yellowtail. So, what are they selling that stuff for? $1 a bottle, maybe $2 a bottle, and then the retailer gets to put it out there. And then who's going to know?
I would think that that's really a response to some very specific tariff scenarios that have caused a really quick and large recoil of sales into China. And it's, with such a massive brand pull, and then all of a sudden you got 150 to 200% tariffs imposed on Australian wine headed into China these days. So it's a lot cheaper to make yellowtail, at a vineyard somewhere else in the world and sell it in China. And that's just because it's a tariff situation. It's not because anyone's it's kind of forced upon, because Australia's got plenty of wine to sell. There's plenty of yellowtail right now to sell.
Well, one of the greatest experiences I've had with food pairing, it was many years ago, and maybe it was, everybody's aha moment, which I don't even like talking about generally, but was a John Riddick Vineyard cab that just blew me away, and I can still taste it. It was probably 20 years ago, but that's also when Australian wines were way more prevalent, and the reason I say that is because my Tuesday tastings here, which would start at 9 and end at 2 every Tuesday for 35 years, it was sort of a litmus of what was going on in the industry. So they were bringing me whatever they were bringing in. And I mean, I can tell you, I haven't seen Australia wines of any quantity in a long time. But I want to tell you a quick anecdotal story, and then we're going to get into this old world, new world idea. I went to a tasting, in fact, I was a little reluctant to go because I thought it was going to be a bunch of wine geeks getting together and pontificating, but it ended up being very fun. And what they do is somebody sponsors it and they bring a vertical of something, or they bring just a whole bunch of stuff, and they cost them. I'm sure it cost this guy $7,000 to taste 7 people on the wine. And long story short, it ended up being a vertical of Grange. And I guess it was a blend. I guessed a couple of things. I guess it was Syrah in there, et cetera. But I did not guess, and I guessed it was Old World because of the character. It was clearly a vertical of the same vineyard. That was obvious to me. But I didn't guess the region. And the reason is I hadn't experienced enough Australian wine that have that depth and history behind it to show up in the glass. But it's still considered a New World wine, is it not?
We don't really talk about New World and Old World anymore.
Good.
We think those lines are blurred by technology, know-how, farming, climate, and your experience is an exact example of why.
Yeah, like in the CMS, Master Sommelier tasting method, most people will tell you look at fruit quality and minerality to differentiate Old World and New World, meaning that Old World wines have more minerality and New World wines have less minerality. And of course, when I say old and new, we mean European and non-European wines. And that European wines have more kind of tart and fresh and sometimes dried fruit quality. And non-European wines have more kind of overripe, jammy fruit quality. And we just think that's just not true.
Yeah, I mean,
thanks to Passarolas.
Yeah, when we were in Australia, when we first moved, I was on the clock, as I say, for the MS exam, and I still had tasting left to pass. I had passed the other sections and was coming back to the US later that year to take the test. And Jane would always, we'd have tasting groups, but Jane would always be pouring wines blind for me. And there were so many times where she'd pour wine and I'd be like, Brunello Montalcino. And she'd say, Sangiovese from Heathcote in Victoria of Australia. Great.
Wow.
Cornell. No, this is Syrah from the Adelaide Hills.
Wow.
And
that's interesting.
Burgundy all the time, white Burgundy more specifically than red Burgundy, but both. And it was just a scenario where it wasn't even like, I had eventually passed. So it's a scenario where, we've just realized that Old World, New World is just another example of how we attempt to simplify wine, but by doing so, we erase the nuance that people search for throughout their entire wine career.
That story just reminded me of the series Drops of God. Have you seen this?
We haven't yet.
But
man, it's great.
I'm pretty sure it's based on there's an old Japanese graphic novel called The Drops of God, where only a few volumes were translated into English. And it is this, saga of someone's beginning and then growing life with wine and so on. And there was I think there was an inheritance of a collection, and there's a whole 400-page volume dedicated to Burgundy.
That's the story. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly the story. But my wife and I binged on it for 2 nights, and we watched the whole series. And the reason I was intrigued by it because I have this romantic view of wine, and that it's all really about the story. And I think people, we can talk about this as Master Somms, and I want to get into this sort of corporate America conversation about Australian wines. But I think that the aristocracy of wine, for most people, is because we might sit at a table, swirl and sniff, and start throwing out expletives and adjectives on wines when people will say, I don't get that. And what Drops of God did, even to my closest friends who have told me, they think I'm full of shit because I say those things about a wine, go to a restaurant literally the day after they watch the show and order the House Bordeaux and try and describe it. And so that's what was intriguing about the story, because it is about wine, but the aristocracy is missing. You understand the value and the passion it takes to do and to be in this industry to do it. So I encourage you to see it. You mentioned something about Treasury Wine Estates, and certainly Constellation Treasury, Southern Wines and Spirits, RNDC, the Beverage Group, whatever the new one is at Wine Warehouse. I have this balance problem. Like, you go to the market, and particularly Australian wines and any import, you're going to see Josh, you're going to see Apothic Red, you're going to see, Snoop Dogg's Cali Red and all this other crap. And then you're going to see on the import section, you're going to see all this basic entry-level stuff. Yellowtails of the end cap stack, okay, big deal. But even when you go to the import section, it's Marquis de Cáceres and for Spain, and it's Mercure de Scal, and then it's going to be, Jules Jadot, Bourgogne Blanc, and hardly indicative of what these regions can produce. And so your passion and your desire is to change that.
Well, I don't know if we're ever going to change
what
you'll find in grocery stores, right? Because they need to have wines that are made in mass quantities that can service every grocery store in their chain across the country. And,
it takes a century to get into that business.
What we want to change is we want, great. If people start drinking wine in the grocery store, that's fine. But we hope that they then graduate to finding an independent retailer that they can buy wine from. Maybe they just start spending a little bit more money. We don't believe you have to spend a ton of money to drink good wine, but just we hope people kind of graduate beyond the grocery stores and beyond those wines that are necessarily made in mass quantities to kind of more of the artisanal products that we all, got in this for.
And that doesn't necessarily require a massive increase of investment or purchase price for Australian wine. Right now you go into a restaurant and, Sancerre's on by the glass, and they're all well over $20 a glass these days. And that's, probably happened in the last 10 years. And not to be confused with New Zealand, Australia's Sauvignon Blanc is quite different. And, we think that we would hope that one day Australia proves itself worthy enough of being considered for just an easy Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet or Pinot Noir Chardonnay glass pour that costs well under $20 a glass and makes that independent restaurant profitable and sustain its employees' livelihoods, and also makes the guest really happy.
And so where are we at in general? You're all over the country, or you're supplying wine in how many states?
We're in 25 right now.
Well, okay, that's pretty good. And so how long have you been doing this?
3 years. Our first container arrived October of 2020.
Now, I mean, that 25 state, it sounds big, but there's a scenario with some of those 10 cases in 3 years, maybe not that dismal.
I get it.
Each state really, it's the distribution network in the US. It's funny, we're talking about all these things and all this hard work and so on. The establishing a network of distribution that is confident in Australian wine being a viable product for them is absolutely the steepest mountain we've ever thought of climbing. And we are on day one of that hike. And
that's a great analogy.
It is hard.
Well, first of all, what's very interesting to me, and I had this conversation the other day with somebody, but and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon, but there's been a lot of social network awareness and disgust and disillusionment with the 3-tier system in America. For the listeners, that's supplier, winery or importer, to distributor, Southern Wines and Spirits or Young's, to retailer, or to the restaurant, and to the consumer. And it's a forced required path for alcohol and all things. I mean, I always say that prohibition was never repealed. It was just broken up into 50 pieces. And so these are the headwinds that you're encountering. I have a friend who brings in Armenian wines now, and I mean, I would say day one is probably exactly right. He's been doing it for 5 years because yeah, so you get distribution in Idaho, but like you said, you sell 5 cases, and that doesn't cover the cost it took to even start there. So those headwinds were unthought of, but not unthought of. Those headwinds were unbeknownst to you, or you knew you were going to get them and you just got to plow through them.
I think, we hunkered down. It's funny, we look at each other and, we're in the middle of year 3 of the business. And, I say to Jane, hey, we're doing better than last year, but did we really have to write a 500-page book to make that happen?
Yeah, right.
So it's tough. And I think, yeah, it's difficult, but I also feel like, every now and then we say, well, that 3-tier system might actually help a little bit, because if wine wasn't regulated in the US, we'd all be drinking Amazon brand Cabernet that could be stocked into our garage in same day delivery.
Good point. There's protection there.
RNDC and Southern and Gout, those are big companies, but they're not the biggest, and I think the fact that alcohol is not really, gotten to that point, the 3-tier system prevents it slightly.
Well, it's supposed to.
Right.
And the courage you guys have to start, because you have a passion to show the world what Australian wines can be, which can be very. I mean, we did a lot of them. I mean, when I bought this place in 1988, we had all kinds of Australian wines. I mean, I think the first wine that I bought was a Lewin Chardonnay, like an 83 Chardonnay or something. It was a fabulous wine. So as you started this path, where did you start? Did you just go to Australia, start tasting, or because you were working in the restaurants, you found some things that you thought were interesting, and why aren't these sold in America, and thought this was a good idea?
Yeah, exactly. We had relationships with all these producers from being buyers in Australia, and we put together this business plan in late 2019, and
rewrote it about 10 times, and it definitely doesn't look like today.
We're not following it, and
yeah, well, of course, COVID through
yeah,
and some unexpected difficulties, but yeah, we just felt like, and I think we had the benefit of living in Australia, getting to know Australian wine, developing relationships with these producers, but also having been buyers and sommeliers in the United States. We had an idea what people liked and were looking for, and what would appeal to both buyers and just drinkers. And so, and we also we had the philosophy that we didn't want to, we didn't want to put something on a boat and bring it halfway across the world if it wasn't introducing something unique to the landscape, right? We don't want to bring over a Chardonnay that just tastes like Sonoma Coast or whatever. We wanted to make sure every wine we were bringing in, offered something unique. And unfortunately or fortunately, there are just a lot of great, unique wines being made in Australia. So we have a big portfolio. We have 34 producers in our portfolio.
Wow. That's
yeah.
a lot.
And
so that was actually a question: were you positively received by the manufacturers when you came to them and said, "Look, we want to bring you to the U.S. and we have to negotiate terms and all that"? But was there any resistance by the producers to jump on board with you?
Very little.
Very little. I think the U.S. is, at the end of the day, kind of a pie in the sky market for most countries, and Australia's less than 10% of the population, so it represents a lot of opportunity. But I think a lot of our producers are, they're at the end of the day, they're small farmers, and they say, listen, we're never going to send you a lot of wine. Mm-hmm. We just want to, expand our brand recognition. We believe in what we're doing and where we're doing it. And, I think that allows us to really curate a wonderful story of the country's produce through all the wines in the book. And then there's a few others that maybe would qualify as mid-sized producers that could support being in 25 or 30 markets. And everything else builds around it. But yeah, we're trying to build demand and not fulfilling, or trying rather than supplying demand. So
Yeah. And, we all wish we could just immediately be selling all the wine that everyone wants us to sell. But I think at the very least, our producers they know that we're talking about their wines accurately. And we're talking about Australia and the regions accurately and with passion and with enthusiasm. And they know, that we have integrity in terms of our business practices. I think people are with us and behind us. And because of COVID, we did not start this company with funding. We just kind of had a little bit of savings. And so we approached producers basically asking for extended payment terms so that we could, the idea was that we basically sell the
That's
wine
smart.
before it gets here and get money and be able to pay them. And, we were expecting half or more of the producers to tell us no, and everyone said yes.
Well,
So we ended up starting with a larger portfolio than we were planning to, but it's great, and it was very touching to have that kind of that kind of support.
Well, by getting that support, you've obviously tapped a latent need by the suppliers. Like, yeah, we'd love to be in America, and you're creating that need, and obviously the headwinds are going to be great to do that. Did it surprise you when I said early on in the conversation that I literally brought in a 40-foot container that I split with Trader Joe's, and this is probably like 1995 or 93 or something, of half bottles of late harvest Semillon? Did that just seem like an incredible amount of wine for that type of wine and that era of wine consumption in America?
I mean, I think that is credit to Wine of the Month Club more than anything.
I appreciate that, but that's not, but again, split it with Trader Joe's, so they had this huge latent need. Hey, it's dessert wine. Hey, it's a half bottle, but it was Australian and it was unbelievably gorgeous. And I just thought, when I think about that, I go, wow, who does that? Who would do that today? I mean, would anybody do that today?
Nobody.
Trader Joe's won't talk to us today.
And I think it was
we don't have enough wine. There was Trader Joe's, but
I think it was Frederick Wildman was the importer.
Yeah,
so
that was back with John Larche.
What's that?
John Larche in the Australian Premium Wine Collection.
Yeah, I think it was
Wine Belt.
Well, I actually have to admit that the reason I got the wine, actually, I think I paid 20 cents less a bottle than Trader Joe's did. The guy that Frederick Wildman was a good friend of mine from our adolescence, so he's like, "I'll take care of you." So I think that's, I'll admit that. But for the listeners, you as a supplier, importer, and carving new teeth, really, because we've established that the market for Australian wine in America is not that, wasn't as strong as it might be now. But you got to go out in the field. You got to educate the salespeople. You have to sit in front of a sales meeting, a bunch of vendors, go to visit the States, explain to the people that are on the street that are making the sales calls on the restaurants, that are making the sales calls on the retailers, what this is all about. And so how does that go? How do these people receive your message about what you're trying to do?
Well, we're low-level frequent flyers.
That's a great way to put it.
That we have to sell the wines 3 times. We have to sell them to the distributors and get them to come on board. And no distributors start working with us thinking that it's going to be just easy sells, right? They're just going to announce their portfolio and say, here's some, Yarra Valley Sauvignon Blanc, and here's some Gippsland Chardonnay, and everyone's going to sweep them all up. People know it's going to be a challenge. So, we get a lot of no's at the distribution level. But when we do strike up that relationship, it's with the understanding that we're going to be very involved in education and training for their team and help with selling to restaurants and retailers. So then we'll go into market and we'll do market work. We'll visit restaurants and retailers and do education for them and tastings for them. And then we do a lot of consumer facing events too, to sell it for the 3rd time to help them with pull through. Because, it's not enough for distributors to buy these wines. It's not even enough for restaurants and retailers to buy these wines and have it sit on the shelves. We need we need the consumers picking up the wines or the restaurants and retailers pointing to the wines and really selling them. So we always describe it, maybe I just describe it this way, as we're kind of constantly trying to build ambassadors across the country for Australian wine. People who are going to say, someone comes in and says, oh, I like Sancerre, but your cheapest Sancerre is, $95 a bottle. What should I drink? And say, oh, this Adelaide Hills Sauvignon Blanc is amazing. And, we just really want to get advocates behind these wines who are going to point to them and sell them. And then eventually have consumers asking for them. It's our goal in 10, 15 years that people do walk into a wine shop or a restaurant and say, oh, I really like Margaret River Cabernet Sauvignon. What do you have from there? Or I love, Adelaide Hills Chardonnay. What do you recommend? That we want people to recognize these categories and these wines.
That's a tall order. And, again, bon courage. It's great that you embrace this. Brand building is very difficult to do in any industry. I have a niece who wants to build a brand in salad dressing. I don't think she could have picked a more, competitive, congested, pay for the shelf space type product, but that's what she's passionate about. But brand building is hard to do. And I think your word ambassador is a very important word, because you want somebody to take that bottle home. Maybe you did a tasting, maybe you educated a retailer, they hand sell a bottle of Adelaide Chardonnay and they take it home and somebody share it with somebody, and they are now your ambassador. It's almost a social network type metric where one tells 10, tells 10 to 10, and all of a sudden now you've got people having those conversations. Where have you seen the most success? Restaurants, retail?
I think, right now, and I think kind of one of the reasons that we saw early on is that we felt that we were able to speak to the sommelier and the professional. That was something that we were doing, that we were able to do. It's why the book came about. I think, by being able to speak to the professionals, great. But then we realized, I think, through this that, there's so many events that we do at night with consumers, whether it's a restaurant dinner or a trade or a tasting in a retail shop. It's like we're working service, all the time.
Yeah, right. You're used to it now. At least you've worked service, the most expensive, the number one restaurant in the world. So, what's the name of the book? Because I don't have that in front of me.
How to Drink Australian. Do we have a copy around?
We don't.
In the car.
We put boxes of them somewhere.
Yeah. But it is a 500-page book, 30 original maps, wine recommendations, over 100 producer interviews, producer profiles, probably a third of Australia's wineries profiled in the book or referenced in the book.
Beautiful artwork, photography. We really want the book to be both a reference that we wish we had when we were, studying wine in our earlier days. So a reference for professionals, but also really engaging to, the enthusiast. So I think you can pick it up, you can read a section, you can read a part of a chapter and just learn a little bit about Heathcote or Beechworth or, Coonawarra or wherever you want to explore. And we've tried to write it in a way that's both detailed, but also accessible.
I'm assuming that this comment here from your PR agency, it says Bordeaux, Burgundy, Champagne, 3 reasons why Australia's regions rival the top wines of the world, and which is, great accolade for them. You already call them the top regions of the world. But are you positioning the Australian wines based on the terroir differences and the regional character that your boutique versions of Australian wines are presenting? In other words, I can tell if I have enough Adelaide Cabernet, the difference in that and a Barossa Cabernet or someplace else.
Totally.
Absolutely. I think, we can, or at least I think a lot of sommeliers and wine professionals, would like to think that they can tell the difference between Gevrey-Chambertin and Volnay. And those are two, Pinot Noir, villages that are 20-minute drive from each other.
Right.
And, we always say Australia has 65 wine growing regions. Every single one of them grows Shiraz to some extent because it was such a commercially viable product. And, you could line up 65 regional expressions of Shiraz across the country for a tasting. And if a bunch of professionals walked in, they would think they have, 30 countries represented. And,
Really? Wow.
I think
That's interesting.
that when a grape is planted in the right place, picked at the right time, and it really expresses where it's comes from, there is no superlative ability in Bordeaux versus the Yarra Valley versus Napa Valley to express that unique source. And I think that goes back into that old world, new world distinction. Wine has been in Europe for thousands of years, but so much of the technology that Europe uses today was built on research done in Australia. And it is modern times mean that we're making better wine in every region across the world. And it means we have a more focused lens into where the wine comes from.
Is it consumer driven? Everybody knows Napa cabs have become these pretty opulent, fruit forward, at least the mainstream Cabernets from Napa, but even some of the expensive ones. So it's not just low end cab. Is there regional consumer versions of the Adelaide or Barossa? Are we still, because the industry is staying true to its terroir and its manufacturing methods, everybody's still got their unique identity inside an appellated area of Australia?
There's regional blends, absolutely. You look at, Grange, for example, just says Southeast Australia on it, and they give themselves the flexibility to source from any region from the states of South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, and Tasmania for that one wine. So I think it's the aim of what is that estate trying to do? Are they trying to make something that's consistent with a flavor profile year to year, and that sometimes comes with the expense of seasonal and site specificity. And then there's other producers. I think there's a broad mix. Australia has its own versions, domestic versions of what people drink, akin to our Kendall Jackson or Gallo. There's a Shiraz called Pepperjack that everyone drinks in Australia, and that's a regional Shiraz, and it's pretty affordable and in all the grocery stores, and it kind of does the same thing. I think that's probably that's the gateway to wine. That's where the consumer begins. And those are the wines that have the biggest job to do to convert the cocktail drinker, the beer drinker, to also a wine drinker. So they need to exist everywhere.
I wonder if, it's an interesting thought. Wine consumption is down in the U.S., the relative generations, everybody, it surprised me the other day that somebody goes, I'm an older millennial. I'm like, oh my God, they're older already? It's like, my daughters are millennials, and yeah, she's 32 or something. So now we're looking at the lettered generations, LMNOPs or whoever they are. And I wonder, it just seems, because it seems, one, Australian wines would be more towards contemporary farming, sustainability, biodynamic, organic, all the buzzwords today, natural, if such thing exists. Have you seen that response from the generations that are looking for more authentic things?
I think those generations looking for more authentic things, Australia certainly succeeds. You mentioned organics. Australia has half of the world's certified organic farmland. So there's certainly those what the younger generations are thinking about. Australian wine certainly represents that and does a good job. Packaging is modern and visually pleasing and not kind of stodgy and old. But, I think, like you said, that generation is looking for more story, for more information rather than just a thing. So it's, I think it's also about how it's presented and who's presenting it. And, I think that for us, we'd be probably as successful if we, with that generation, if we were selling another wine from another wine region or country that hit all those, required kind of topics and so on. But, we were the ones bringing it to market, because I think it's all in the way you share it.
Yeah. And unfortunately, I'm not sure if people are associating Australia with that. I think either there's zero association or the association is with more of these bulk produced wines. And so I think Australia often doesn't benefit from sort of the reputation that precedes it. And so that's some of the work we're doing to just get people to think about Australia in a different light.
I think you're right on with that. I think that not unlike Beaujolais Nouveau did to the Beaujolais world, that these yellowtails and even before yellowtail, there were other low price Australian wines on the shelf. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank to some of these things, but we saw them all. But yeah, this is a harder hill to climb because you have that end cap stack that everybody sees when they go to the market, and that's what they equate it with.
I think from a professional perspective, it means the bar that we need to hop over to, surprise someone is the bar of expectations pretty low. If, a retail buyer only knows, Yellowtail and Molly Duker and 19 Crimes, and we bring something, something different. We don't have to, the wine doesn't have to perform that well to, surprise them.
But then you get people who say, oh, these are really good, but I just don't know if I can sell Australian wine. Or they say these are really good and they put them on their shelves, but then they don't actively sell it. And so no one picks it up off the shelf. So, there are definitely all these hurdles that we're addressing with Australian wine.
But it's been done before. I mean, Terry Thies did it with German Riesling. Ole and Obregato did it with Spanish wine. Kermit Lynch did it with French and Italian wine. It is not a mountain that hasn't been climbed. I think our trail's just different.
Well, you already said it. You said Sancerre like 3 times. I mean, come on, 10 years ago, Sancerre, like, what? And now, I tell this anecdotal joke. I went to a Spanish restaurant with my cousin and he ordered a Sancerre, and the woman's like, well, we don't have Sancerre here. But having no idea that it was a French region and just thinks it's just a wine, someone will order Sancerre. So, it can happen. It can really happen.
Yeah.
And more kudos to you for educating. Yeah, I wonder if the tagline isn't, hey, if you liked Yellowtail, where do you try this?
I don't think that's the right tagline.
Says that.
And get sued by Yellowtail.
Yeah, right. Well, that's the problem. 19 Crimes is the other one that just makes me cringe. But I suppose it's necessary for you to be successful is to have the differentiation. And like when my father tasted a white, pink wine with Bob Trincaro in 1973 or 1974 that he had made a mistake on, brought people to the table and piqued their interest, and there was born, a brand and a segment that had not existed before. And particularly when he was set out to make a dry Provence style wine, and I ended up with that. So I think that the palate, sort of using a pun, is open. I mean, I think that with the efforts you're putting into this, that and proper explanation of appellations and the storytelling, have you found that to be successful? The storytelling of your properties that you represent?
Totally. I think it's the storytelling of our properties, but it's also the storytelling of greater Australian regions, Australian climate, Australian culture. I think, we want to, and we do tell the stories of these individual producers. And I think those help people kind of combat in their mind the idea of Australian as just like tank farms, but we also want, we want, and we need to sort of get across how different Australia is, not just on a producer by producer level, but in general. Because I think before we moved to Australia, we thought, oh, Australia is just another quote unquote new world wine producing region. It can make a lot of wines like the US or, other places in the Southern Hemisphere can make, just maybe with a little more eucalyptus.
Yeah, right.
And we realized how wrong we are, that for lots of like climate and cultural regions, Australia actually creates very, very unique wines from the rest of the world, from anywhere else in the rest of the world. And so I think we really want to tell that story, that it's that there should be a mandate to put these wines on your shelves and wines on your wine list, because they do represent not only different stories, but just different wines, different styles of wine that aren't out there. So yeah, we're telling all the stories, and that's why we're so excited about the book, because it just hopefully it means we're not just changing hearts and minds, like literally one person at a time, but that, we can multiply ourselves through this book and be in many places at once.
And that this modern story of the entire country's produce is entered into the lexicon of wine theory throughout the world. There's so many books that there's recommended readings from the WSET and the Institute of Master of Wine and the CMS on so many other countries. The last time a book like this was written was in 1976.
Wow.
And,
I probably have it here. My dad collected all kinds of wines books.
It is by a guy named Len Evans, who's really and we talk about Len Evans in the book, and he's really one of the most important figures in Australian wine. And but it's that kind of movement. That's the only way this movement actually happens, is we can only be successful as if Australian wine is learned about, across all tiers of the industry.
Isn't that fascinating? Because we're already at 55 minutes, so we're almost done here. It's unbelievable. We'll have to do it again. But I had a Master Somm in here, Emmanuel Kamiji, makes wine in pure red. He's a good friend. And he was talking about when he passed the test in 1996. He goes, yeah, what did I have to learn? I had to learn about Burgundy, Bordeaux, Champagne. South America wasn't even on the radar, but we had to learn a little bit. And, certainly there's some Australia, but mostly all European and American. And now, there's many more parts of the world that are producing wines of repute. And Australia always has. It should have been part of the curriculum a long time ago. Maybe that's changing because of your book and because of your awareness to the marketplace. Who represents you in Los Angeles? Anybody?
So, right now, we self-distribute through USA Wine West in California. So our distribution landscape in California is slim to none. California is we're really not present at all. We do sell quite a bit of wine to a really wonderful supporter and dear friend at the Justa Grocer named David Wood. He's a lovely Australian guy, ran, really important restaurants, owned really important restaurants in Australia years ago. And he's just been a wonderful friend and supporter. So if you know Justa in Venice,
I don't. I've never been there, but I'll go.
Yeah, the Grocer. Ask for a guy named David.
You would love David.
Oh, he's wonderful and such an awesome industry badass. Really owned what would be equivalent to a 2 Michelin star restaurant in Australia, but back in the 90s, and was the first person to do it. And
what was his name?
David Wood.
David, because go ahead.
We have a few producers with a small distributor in California called Roni Selects, and she's really great. But yeah, we California, and it's funny, California and New York, these markets are very, very saturated. And everyone wants to be in them. So we found it's harder to acquire distribution in these markets. And
New York is better though.
A little bit better. We have a little bit more going on over there, but and not that it's easy anywhere, but some of our best markets have been Ohio and North Carolina and Georgia and Tennessee.
Wow, that's interesting.
That just aren't quite as saturated, and places that really are.
Never had anyone pay attention and go into the market at least once a year and do events and tell stories about wine. And, it was always fighting for the shelves and wine lists in these considered biggest cities, A-list markets. But the reality is there's hundreds of cities and every state in this country loves wine. And that's, we want to see them all.
Well, I think you're doing it right. I think the way social networking has changed marketing to storytelling, and I think the wine industry is settling there because if we don't tell the stories, if we don't raise curiosity in the consumer to try and go to their wine shop, ask the purveyor, and I recommend this to all my clients, or I did, find somebody that you trust and let them guide you through the path of wine, because if you just keep Now, I'll tell you a funny story. I was at the market. I was shooting some videos. I was actually doing a little rant against 19 Crimes or Cali Red or something. And a woman came up and she says, she knew me, and I couldn't remember why, but I think I coached her kids in Little League or something. And I said, what? And I just interrupted. I said, what are you looking for? She says, there's something different than what I usually drink. And that was a huge volume of those few words, because that's rare.
Yeah.
And particularly she's walking around a supermarket aisle. And so she drank J. Lore as her regular go-to. So this is encouraging for what things like you're doing. If you do need recommendations, I've dealt with all of them. There has been a consolidation in LA of small wholesalers. Epic would have been a great one, but they got gobbled up by RNDC. But there's still some really good, hardworking, went to a tasting yesterday or 2 days ago from Serendipity, knowledgeable salespeople. And so if you want an introduction to them, to a handful of these people, I'd be happy to do it. Actually, one of them, my favorite, called Specialty Wine Cellars, he lives in Tennessee. He lives in Nashville.
Oh, wow.
Really?
He just moved there recently.
Amazing.
Yeah, we would definitely take you up on that. We've talked to Serendipity in Texas, and
We can talk again.
yes, we would love to talk again.
You need those guys that can tell the stories. Fabulous conversation. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, us too.
We really appreciate your time and interest and everything that you said.
I'm going to seek the book, read it. I don't know if there are 500 pages, but we'll try. We'll try to do that.
Read it in spurts.
I have a 12-hour flight. We're going to Tuscany next Thursday, and then Armenia. I'm helping the industry, which I'm not sure that they're capable of being helped necessarily, but because they're still in a stage of competition amongst each other instead of sort of collaboration. But maybe I'll have time to do that. So thank you again, and cheers. And I will send you all the links to this if you want to socialize it whenever it gets released.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you
Great
so
to meet
much.
you.
Take care. Thank you for listening to Wine Talks with Paul Kalamkarian. Don't forget to subscribe, because there's more great interviews on their way. Folks, have a great time out there in the wine world. Cheers.